In this video, we're going to walk through the first chapter of Expect More, the Arab Spring, Expect the Exceptional. Once again, the goal is not to repeat or expand on the text, but rather to say why that text is there and how it can be used and discussed when engaging with the community. We begin in the very first paragraph and the discussion of the Arab Spring. This is here because it is, frankly, a big, moving, great story. What we want to do is get people's attention, and we want to link them into thinking libraries and expecting more beyond what they're expecting. A lot of these conversations will be because people's experiences with their local public library or local school library or their current academic library, what have you. What we're really trying to do in this chapter is to give people a wider perspective, to say, look, there are libraries in lots of different places, and they can be really big, and the impact they can have within communities can be large and beyond what you're expecting simply with literacy or reading. So here in the first paragraph, we're linking to the love of libraries, but at a larger scale. We're capturing their attention right off the bat. We're giving them a really inspirational story, one that many of them will be familiar with. And as we go through it, what we begin talking about is scale. How much did it cost? Talking about this on a national, international, large canvas that we can be thinking about it. What happens is after we get their attention with this story about what happened in Alexandria and the great thing that happened about libraries and show this, is we begin to then, right around here, tie to the idea of the sort of less lofty idea, which is this may have happened in a very exceptional circumstance in Egypt, but this is also happening in the UK, the United States, and things you may be familiar with, including protesters in Philadelphia and down in city councils. So we're starting to take the very large concept, look, libraries are important on a national, international stage, and take it to our local stage, which is saying, look, people don't just love them, but they go out and they fight for them and they work for them. And this may, in fact, be something that you're having this conversation as part of. Once again, Kenya, constantly trying to get them to think of libraries as a larger concept with a larger societal mission. By the time we get down to Ferguson, Missouri, what we begin to do is introducing this sort of larger narrative about the importance of libraries beyond books, right? In Ferguson, in New York City, in Calgary, in Baltimore, in Paris, in Iraq, we constantly see people thinking about supporting being part of libraries beyond just what you think it is. Now, I mentioned here in the annotation here George Lakoff's work. George Lakoff is a political strategist, but also a linguist, and he looks at the sort of use of words. And one of the things that he's written great books, for example, Don't Think of an Elephant. And it goes something like this. When you're trying to get a message out, when you're trying to market or what have you, the words you use matter. And they matter not simply at a large level, but at a very physiological level. When you repeat certain terms, the brain keys off of the repeated terms and begins to storing them, and it begins to lose the nuance. What does that mean in practicality? Well, the example, he gives many of them, but I'll give you a really simple, silly one. Ready? Don't think of the color red. All right, there's a good chance you just thought of the color red because you heard that word. And even though I said don't, you really can't engage that thought or concept or interpret the sentence without conjuring images and thoughts. Now, that's really specific, a color, but when you look at a larger context, and particularly, once again, his world in politics, you key these terms all the time. So when Richard Nixon went on television to say that he was not a crook, it wasn't the first time people had heard the connection between the word Nixon and crook. And so even though he said, I'm not, what really was happening is he was building into an existing narrative, existing terminology, and reinforcing them by Nixon crook, Nixon crook. Now, he wanted to be Nixon, not crook, Nixon, not crook, but the not part wasn't being repeated that often, so the subtlety gets lost. So if we start out with, hey, look, libraries are more than just books, and we'll get to that, but if we start out with libraries are just books, or beyond books, not just books, what we're really doing is we're reinforcing the concept of library, book, and the subtlety will begin to get lost. So by beginning to link libraries to concepts such as libraries and crisis, library and community, library and society, library and change, we're starting off trying to create more forward-thinking and frankly positive and impactful concepts. As we keep going, what we begin doing is then start talking about linking to specific terms. So when we try to discover why all the support for libraries, there is power in libraries and steel in librarians. It goes deeper than traditional buildings and books. The reason for the protests and protectiveness over libraries is not found in collections, materials, and columns. The answer, the riddle, etc., is learning. So what we want to do is, if we're going to challenge the concept library book, not supplant it, not say that's bad, but to add to it, what we're going to need to do is give them someone else to connect to, something else that throughout the rest of the text we're going to come back to. Which is, if what we're trying to say is it's more than books, without using that direct terminology early, what we're really trying to do is say, all right, then what is it? Because if you're just saying it's not something, what you're allowing a community to do is to determine what they think it is. Oh, it's babysitting. Oh, it's all about maker spaces. Oh, it's for the poor. Oh, it's not me. So what we have to do is we have to connect that string. We can't leave it dangle. So if it's not going to be connected specifically to quiet pleasure time reading in the afternoon, what are we going to connect it to? And the short answer, and where my work and research is, and what we're going to see throughout Expect More, is to learning. The reason we have the books, the reason we have the materials, the reason that people love them and protect them is because people love to protect learning. And frankly, who's going to be anti-learning? Who's going to come out and say, oh, no, learning's horrible. We don't want to support that in our community. Whether that community is academic community, which is a learning community, whether it's a school community, which is a learning community, whether it's a public community, which we're going to argue is a learning community. We're constantly want to create this new connection, learning. So we go through a little bit of this. What else are we doing? Because remember, the first chapter, which is short, they're all attempting to be short, is about getting people's attention, to move them through the rest of the text. And so we start with the big stuff. We're starting with fireworks to get their attention. We'll get into subtlety later. So where do we go from here? Well, we talk about, for example, that libraries are going to evolve. It's okay if you have an old-fashioned sense of libraries, but they've evolved over time. They have 6,000 years of history, and we built the web before it was the web, and we started doing all this. And so what we want to do is now get the idea that it's learning and evolving. And evolving is an important term because evolving is an inviting term. What it means is not that someone is wrong or old-fashioned or right or wrong or whatever it is, but that we're going to be talking about movement. We want to give an invitation for people who may have that old-fashioned view to evolve what they're thinking. So we're not saying you're wrong. We're just trying to say, hey, it's moved forward a bit since then. And so that idea of inviting people into the conversation is going to be important. Then I bring up the idea of the field of librarianship, and I start throwing numbers at it, right? So it's a $40 billion worldwide industry, $26 billion in North America. 5 times more people visit U.S. public libraries than college football, basketball, and hockey games combined. This comes from a great librarian, Kim Silk. And Kim Silk talks about the difference that what you need are stories to make the data matter and data to make the stories real. We love narratives. We love telling the stories. And there are a lot of stories throughout this book because it gives people, we're a storytelling species. We understand things through narrative. But we need data to say, look, we're not just telling a story, we're also making this real. This is connected. And so this is just one example of doing that. Perhaps the biggest why question you ask is, and the one that is at the center of the book is, why do so many people see librarianship as antiquated, conservative, and less than inspiring? We're going to acknowledge the truth. It makes no sense to start, if we have a narrative of expecting more, we have to start with what people may be expecting now and then to move them. And so the idea is we want to say, look, you're not wrong. There are people in the field and outside of the field that still see that as what libraries are. We just want to begin to expect more. And then we want to talk about the idea that everyone should expect more, not just out of library directors, library board members, library users, but provosts and principals and teachers and all the communities we work with. So we're setting a big tent. This book is written not for librarians, want to make sure they feel invited, but for the people who either support or oversee them, including provosts, students, parents, board members, volunteers, and just about everyone who ever pays local taxes. You need to know what libraries are capable of and to raise the bar on your expectations. So this goes sort of to a larger accountability narrative, which is if you're paying taxes, if you're being part of this, if you're supporting, you better get your money's worth. And if all you're thinking is, well, it's a nice calm place for pleasure reading on the third afternoon of Saturday for poor people, you're not getting your money's worth. You need to talk about how it can really change what you're doing. So then we go down to foreshadowing a little bit of what we're going to talk about. So once again, that sort of previewing, we want to get people to read the rest of the text. So we begin to give them ideas of things that may not fit into what they're thinking about. Fab labs, printers, where students are shelving books, where libraries are creating new companies, etc. So we're really getting to the point of saying, look, we're going to talk a lot about cool stuff. Here's just a few examples to whet your appetite. And then this idea of here's the key to successful libraries, you. So we end this chapter, and well, you see, we end just about every chapter, and certainly the book, with this call to be involved. This conversation is lovely, but if at the end of it, people walk away saying, boy, I think of libraries very differently, but then they don't act very differently, and whether it's in supporting or visiting or being part of or volunteering or contributing, what have you, then we truly haven't succeeded with our advocacy. So we want to let them know early and often that this is going to involve buy-in by them. They are going to have to be part of this. That ultimately they own the library. While librarians may be the stewards of it, the owners are the communities being served. So we're going to put it right up front. Successful library is you. In a company, in a whatever it is, the community and what it is and their expectations are what's going to drive what's about to happen next. So once again, a very short chapter, but we're trying to do a lot of things. We're trying to get people's attention. We're trying to say it's okay to have an old-fashioned view, but look, you can be so much more. Foreshadow a little bit of what that more is, and then build an obligation for people so that they feel like they are obligated to figure out what more is, whether it's from I want more or whether it's in I deserve more, which are two very different narratives. We want to let them know that they're part of it. That's the goal here with Chapter 1. I look forward to conversations about the text of it, the concepts within the text, but also, once again, the strategy behind writing, the deconstruction of that text.